Well, it started as a humanitarian mission. It morphed into a campaign to destroy and degrade the enemy. Now it's expanding again. Prime Minister Tony Abbott will likely announce an increase in troops, perhaps as many as 200 extra, to join the fight against Islamic State. Now these forces will join those from New Zealand to help train Iraqi combat troops to battle the militants. But already there are questions that Australia is being dragged back into a conflict that could last many years. For more, I'm joined by Tom Switzer from the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. He joins me from Brisbane. Tom, good to have you with us. Obviously Australia is committed. It's part of the alliance to try to defeat Islamic State, but where does that begin and end, and what are your concerns about the potential increase in numbers?
Well, that's a very good question. I think the broad consensus is that this is a noble mission to defeat a bunch of, let's face it, brutal barbarians, but it's not altogether clear how the national interest here is served. You have to remember, the mission here is to help rebuild the Iraqi army to take over towns in the northwest of Iraq, Sunni strongholds, and beat the Islamic State terrorists. Now, this is the same grossly ineffective army that went to water in the northern summer last June, July, when ISIS went on its rampage around Iraq. It's the same grossly ineffective Iraqi army that the United States spent $25 billion on from 2003 to 2011. So the idea that air power with some special forces and some army instructors can wipe out these Sunni insurgents, many people would think that's fanciful.
But to do nothing would also risk the spread of Islamic State. You've outlined the deficiencies with the Iraqi military and their legion. They're riddled with corruption. Indeed, people would pay money to officers so they didn't even have to turn up to actually serve in the military. That's how corrupt it was. But without going there to support them, how will they be up for the fight?
Well, look, I think, Stan, we all have to remember that this is ultimately a Sunni Shia battle in Iraq and to some extent in Syria as well. It's a Sunni Shia battle. And the Iraqi army is incapable of fighting ISIS. The Americans are not going to commit ground troops, serious ground troops that will go in. The only groups that are really capable of liberating these towns from the Islamic State are the Shia militia. Now let's put this in some sort of context. The reason why the Islamic State terrorists made such easy inroads throughout much of the Anbar province, the northwest part of Iraq, is because the people in towns like Mosul, Fallujah, Ramallah are predominantly Sunni. And they tolerate the Islamic terrorists, not because they particularly like the Islamic terrorists, they are after all a bunch of brutal barbarians, but these Sunnis in these towns are more worried about the Shia militia that is backed not just by the Shia-run government in Baghdad, but also the Iranian leadership in Tehran.
So has a new government...
by intervening, Stan, we are essentially being in cahoots with the Shia.
You've touched on something fascinating there, and that is the Shia-Sunni divide, because it really complicates the picture, doesn't it? Iraq, even under a new government, is very, very close to Iran. Iran, of course, being the biggest Shia state. Apparently we're not talking directly to Iran at the moment about this, and Iran is supporting Bashar, and Iran is supporting Bashar al-Assad in Syria, of course, the very leader that the West has wanted to get rid of, and supporting some militant groups to overthrow him. It is an extraordinary convoluted picture, isn't it?
It is indeed. It's morally ambiguous, and I think that many people have to recognise that, yes, the Islamic State terrorists are a bunch of brutal thugs, but make no mistake, these carefully choreographed videos of beheadings of Westerners, the Japanese just recently, they are specifically designed to lure the United States and its allies back to Iraq, because this helps reaffirm that potent Sunni narrative on the Arab street that the Americans are in cahoots with the Shia Muslims in this part of the world. And it also helps drive recruitment numbers. It taps into that sense of, you know, we don't have to agree with it necessarily, but there's a sense of grievances among young Sunni Muslims, and they're going to be more attracted to the idea of fighting Sunni jihadists against both the Shia and Westerners. So my point here is it is morally ambiguous, and it's not altogether clear what the end goal is.
Now, your points are obviously realistic, or they're also pessimistic when you look at the actual outcome here. What is it going to take then to develop a strategy that could break the back of a group like Islamic State?
Well, I mean, I don't believe the Islamic State have the capabilities to invade the south of Iraq, because they'll meet stiff resistance from the Shia militia. But I think, to answer your question, the only chance of liberating these towns will be the Shia militia. But let's face it, what's in the interest for the Shia government or the Shia militia to go into a predominantly Sunni area and liberate this country? It all gets back to the creation of Iraq, Stan, after the end of World War I. The Ottoman Empire ran the show in this place, in this part of the world, for the best part of 5 centuries. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed, the British and the French cobbled together these artificial constructs for the best part of a century. The minority ethnic groups have been running the show in these countries. The minority Sunnis under the Hashemites, and then the Baathists under Saddam Hussein. In Iraq, it was in Syria, it was the Alawites under, most recently, the Assad regime. And of course, in Lebanon, it was the Christians. But when those minority regimes are brought down, when those minority regimes are under pressure, you will then have the majority ethnic groups in those countries run the show, and they're more intent on wreaking revenge, seeking revenge against their former tormentors, than in building a nation. And that's why I think it's really a dangerous thing for allied countries to be committing their troop deployment in the middle of what is essentially a Sunni Shia sectarian war, and the battle is over ultimately who was the disciple to Muhammad. I'm not sure that's in the Australian national interest.
Tom, always good to have you on the program. I appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Tom Switzer live there.